Well, lots of news this week, and not all of it great, y'all, with regard to interest rates. So we're going to talk about it on today's video, and I'm going to dive right into the numbers. Mortgage News Daily has a 30-year fixed rate loan today at 6.38%. It's about the same as yesterday, a tenth better, hundredth better actually. We were at 6.35 a week ago, so we've not moved much in the last week. This, of course, is after that big pop in rates. You know, we're up a quarter of a point or more post-Fed cut. We talked about that a lot on the video last week. I'm not going to dive into a lot of those details again today, but I am going to talk about what's pushing the market in the wrong direction this week. We were at 6.52 30 days ago, but remember, y'all, on the 16th of September, just 2 weeks ago, we were at 6.13. That is the lowest level going back to September of 2024. So that was a 12-month low in interest rates, and it really serves as a reminder how quickly things can change. And we're going to go over some of the things that have changed it this week. First, we had a trifecta of stronger than expected economic data. Jobless claims were down 14,000. That was unexpected, y'all. Remember that 6.13 that we saw 2 weeks ago was in the aftermath of those massive revisions to the BLM labor numbers that showed 900,000 fewer jobs created for the year ending August. So that massive downward revision, plus the last two BLS jobs numbers being weaker than expected, really fed into those year bottom rates that we saw back on 9/16. So jobless claims being down 14,000 shows relative strength that was unexpected. Again, not a big mover of the market, but enough to put some nervousness in the bond market. That's why we saw interest rates going up. Same with gross domestic product. Q2 gross domestic product, this is the second revision of those numbers. Y'all may know that that number is revised numerous times. It was up 3.8%. It was expected to only be up 3.3%. Y'all, this is one of the items that is a direct result of tariff policy because you saw the Q1 GDP was actually a negative number because folks were trying to get ahead of the tariffs by buying foreign goods that they were otherwise planning to buy, and they expedited those purchases, front-loading those purchases into Q1. And then in Q2, you saw a contraction from that as those tariffs took effect. Some of those higher costs of imports drove people to buy more domestically produced items, which is why the GDP was much higher in the second quarter, and the average of the two was much higher than expected. So if the goal was to get people to buy American, the tariffs are certainly doing that because the GDP was up in an unexpected way. Durable goods orders were likewise up. It was expected to be a 0.5% decline. It was up 2.9%. Y'all, and that's after pulling military contracts and large aircraft purchases out of the number. It was still up significantly. So those three items alone, they're not blockbuster reports, but they were enough to pressure interest rates higher, especially in light of those Fed comments that made this cut or identified this cut or the future series of cuts as being more addressing a temporary issue rather than a full-fledged change in direction for the Fed. So that's what we're seeing with regard to interest rates, y'all. A little bit higher today. Just would caution folks again, don't put all of your effort into or all of your plan making around the likelihood of future Fed cuts, because as we've seen in the last 2 weeks, interest rates are significantly higher after the Fed cut rates. So keep in mind, we need economic downturn in order for rates to go significantly lower. That's the only thing that would push the Fed into buying mortgage bonds, which is really their most effective tool to actually lower rates. They specifically said they're not doing that in their post-cut commentary this last week. And that's one of the reasons that we didn't get much of a pop, if any. We got zero, actually, out of this Fed cut. Very much a hollow cut with those Fed comments that were released afterward. Still in all, there's an 88% chance of a quarter-point cut going into the October 29th meeting, according to the CME FedWatch tool. There's a 64% chance of an additional quarter-point cut going into the December 10th meeting. So we still have a 64% chance of rates being a half point lower, at least in the Fed funds rate, going into Q4. But again, caution to add, that doesn't necessarily mean mortgage rates will follow suit. People need to buy mortgage bonds for that, y'all. And if the Fed is not going to be that entity that buys them, it's up to the market to determine that. And so far, the market, with where inflation is, thinks rates are about where they should be. So the bottom line is, don't put your plans on hold, y'all. If we're wrong and rates do fall dramatically over the next year or so, well, hallelujah, you got the house you wanted, and you can certainly refinance it to those lower rates when you get them. That said, hope this information is helpful. I know it's a lot of information in a pretty quick call. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'll try and have an individual conversation. I love those about what it all means and where it might be headed. Happy to have those conversations. Happy to get folks pre-approved as well. It's what we do for a living here, y'all. Always blessed to have your referrals. Feel free to reach out. Stay blessed, stay safe, and we'll talk to you next week.